Hello, my friends. D.L. Anderson here. Welcome back to Transformation by Truth podcast as we share the truth concerning these last days and what you must do to save yourself from the violent times that are just ahead. Today's podcast is a word of truth accounting of the end times. The end is coming. The end is near. Today's podcast is entitled End Times 442 Reigning Over Contempt, Part 2. How you can unlock the power of a pure heart that is fixed to do the Father's will. The podcast objectives are analyze the role of obedience and faith in heart regulation, review the primary objectives and illustrations of virtue, and analyze the role of honesty in heart regulation. The only environment that can support a pure heart. Shalom, my beloved brothers and sisters, and welcome to day 271 of our exposition of lawlessness. In the most recent podcast, we analyze the primary illustration of virtue. Enter a maid of honor. In doing so, we came to see how this leading heroine has one of the most difficult tasks of all time. Vis-a-vis, she must purify your heart from all past defilement, and then she must keep your heart consistently clean, to wit, free of any future defilement. This line of thought brought us front and center with one of the most crucial processes that occurs within your entire being. Enter heart regulation. By definition, a regulated heart is a heart that is free of evil intentions and possesses all the spiritual mechanisms required to keep the heart consistently clean and the will of Elohim as its treasure. Now, the critical nature of a regulated heart is sure, and we analyze it in the prior podcast. To wit, a regulated environment is the only environment that can support a pure heart. It is the only environment in which your maid of honor can do her work. That is, to keep your heart fixed and consistently clean. Alas, any other environment would eventually bring you back to a place of defilement, and it would negate all the work you have done in defeating disobedience and doubt. That being said, the question of the hour is simply this: how do you achieve heart regulation to ensure your heart is always fixed to do the master's will? The answer is sure, and we touched on it in the prior podcast. Vis-a-vis, you must operate in all the primary illustrations of virtue. But not only this, my dear friends, you must also continue to operate in all the primary illustrations of obedience and faith. Now, obedience and faith are critical in this procedure because they are the keys to achieving mind regulation. This creates an environment where your mind will only generate thoughts that are aligned with the Father's will. Here is why this is so important. The same way the mind is the gateway into the soul, it is also the gateway into the heart. Ergo, if your mind produces evil thoughts, these thoughts will eventually enter your heart and compromise the work of purification. Ergo, the first step you must take in achieving Heart regulation is achieving mind regulation. My dear friends, this is precisely why faith and obedience are the first two degrees in the pinnacle of holiness, as you can see by the image to the left. It is because you have no chance at unlocking the power of virtue if you have not achieved mind regulation. And you cannot achieve mind regulation if you have not unlocked the powers of obedience and faith. Therefore, Yahuwah, in his infinite wisdom, positioned obedience and faith at the leading interval of the way of holiness, i.e., the foundation of the pinnacle. My dear friends, you must believe me, whether you are laboring to have a heart that is fixed, or if you are going on to the higher heights of patience, peace, kindness, and love. Everything you do in your pursuit of everlasting life is centered on your ability to walk in obedience and faith. Now, that said, we should revisit what we have learned about faith and obedience and tie that into what we are learning about virtue. Per the table below, faith is a fence which is designed to guard and stabilize our minds by regulating our thoughts per the standards of truth. Likewise, obedience is an armed guard and watchman who is commissioned to renovate and protect our minds by the dedicated application of truth. Last but not least, virtue is a maid of honor who cleanses our hearts, also by the dedicated application of truth. And as you have learned before, these 3 degrees of holiness eliminate 3 of the deadliest degrees of lawlessness, i.e., doubt, disobedience, and contempt. Now, as you learned in prior podcasts, the key to defeating disobedience and doubt is operating in the primary illustrations of obedience and faith. For that reason, we invested several podcasts analyzing how obedience and faith defeat disobedience and doubt at the detailed level. Along these lines, we came to understand how the primary illustrations of obedience and faith are safeguards the Father has put in place to ensure we are positioned to reign over disobedience and doubt. You can see these safeguards in the table to the right. First, we have hope, the mind barrier. Then we have trust, the mental bridge. Next, we have the rock of reliance. This leads to the fence of faith. Then you have the elastic suit of compliance. Next, the railway system of conformance. Next, the spiritual converter of transformation. And last but not least, the armed guard and watchman of obedience. Here again, each of these safeguards must be in place for you to unlock the power of virtue and achieve the critical process of heart regulation. Ergo, if you are having any trouble in having your heart fixed to do the Father's will, the first thing you should do is ensure every safeguard in your mind is operational to ensure you are harnessing the power of the linear model of holiness. From there, you will be positioned to initiate one of the greatest campaigns of all time. That is the conquest of the human heart and creating an environment where your heart is fixed to choose the Father's will in every situation. That said, I must move forward with my current remit. To wit, I must show you how the primary illustrations of virtue empower you to achieve heart regulation, after which you will be positioned to tear down forever the wall of partition that comes with the spiritual state of defilement. Now, first things first, the primary objectives of all the degrees of virtue are sequential, as are all the degrees of holiness. You can see this by observing the table below. To wit, the prime objective of each degree of virtue follows a logical order. It begins with honesty, which causes us to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. This leads us to righteousness, which causes us to always do what we know is right. This leads to purification, which constantly cleanses our entire being of every manner of defilement, beginning with our hearts. This leads to virtue, which causes us to choose the Father's will in every situation. Now, in similar fashion, all the primary illustrations of virtue also follow a logical order, as you can see by the table below. First, you have honesty, which is the conscience of your heart. Then you have righteousness, i.e., the path of righteousness, depicted by the way of escape. Then you have purification, which is a spiritual cleansing fluid. And then you have virtue, the maid of honor. From now, I will execute a deep dive into the 3 degrees of virtue, analyzing the role that each play and your ability to create a heart that is fixed. And I will begin with honesty, i.e., the fundamental degree of virtue and the conscience of your heart. The role of honesty in fixing your heart. Now, in End Times 425, your victory over dishonesty, which was posted on February 25th, 2025, we analyze the primary illustration of honesty. Enter the conscience of your heart. 'Tis a key matter, which brings us to an early inflection point I have stated before, and now I am bringing it back to your remembrance. In its original state, your heart, unlike your mind, does not have a conscience. To wit, it does not possess a moral compass to guide you in the way that is right. My dear friends, hear me carefully as I say, this is not only huge, but it is also the primary reason why the scriptures reveal that the heart is desperately wicked. Alas, without a moral compass, it is impossible for you to walk in the path of righteousness. For how can you consistently do what is right if you don't even know what is right? Ergo, the first thing you must do in the order of fixing your heart is unlock the fundamental power of virtue, i.e., your moral compass, as this will allow you to always find the path of righteousness. Now, if you recall, honesty has 2 primary roles in your heart. First, she eliminates self from your heart, and then she creates a renewed character in your heart, which is fashioned by the spirit of Elohim. Here again, this is crucial, for the damage that self did to your character was even worse than the damage he did to your personality. Ergo, the renewal of your character is one of the greatest victories you will obtain in your quest. This speaks to the second role of honesty within your heart, vis-a-vis, by renewing your character. Honesty gains control over your physical thought alignment center. And in doing so, she becomes the governor of your heart. Brothers and sisters, hear me carefully as I say, this is huge. As you can see by the image to the right, your physical thought alignment center feeds directly into your DPU. Now, when physical data enters this faculty, it is aligned with input from your spiritual thought alignment center. This leads to the generation of impressions, which are crucial in revealing the best decision you could make in any situation. Now, the power of this scenario should be quite clear if you consider what happens when dishonesty is at the helm. If you recall, dishonesty takes advantage of the fact that your heart does not have a conscience by default. And in doing so, this evil spirit manipulates the full breadth of your decision making process. And although dishonesty operates within your physical heart, it compromises your spiritual heart as well, due to your cordial workflow. Here lies the inflection and the power. To wit, honesty takes advantage of the same workflow. And in doing so, she makes herself the governor of your spiritual heart via your spiritual thought alignment center. Now, to better appreciate this situation, you should consider how your conscience within your mind works in the same manner. Ergo, honesty plays a huge role in providing your heart with a similar structure found within your mind, which is a huge upgrade. Next, you should consider how honesty, by harnessing the power of the processing of your heart, permeates the full breadth of your heart. Now, true, she does not transform every faculty and actor, but she definitely makes her presence known. And this, my friends, is why your heart will be thoroughly prepared for the ensuing work of righteousness. It is for the following reason, which I will offer as an inflection point. By unlocking the primary illustration of honesty, your heart will, for the first time ever, always know what is right. With a conscience fashioned by the Ruach of Elohim, you will always have a moral compass within your heart, pointing you in the direction of the Father's will and guiding you into the light. And this, my friends, is the foundational role that honesty plays in creating a regulated environment within your heart. By the power of Elohim, she lays a foundation of truth to ensure that your heart will forever and always be fixed to choose the Father's will. She does this by giving you the power to make honest assessments of every matter, which allows you to A, always know what is right, and B, possess a fire and a passion to do what is right. For you have made the Father's will your treasure. You have made righteousness your choice. And this is just one of the many reasons why I am such a huge fan and proponent of honesty. And thus, I must say it again. There are many wonderful things in this world that you may be blessed to find, but who can find an honest man? Now, here is the final word. In our journey through life, nothing will stop us if we possess a moral compass. Brothers and sisters, hear me carefully as I say, navigating through the danger sphere and remaining within the way of holiness is only possible if both our minds and our hearts possess a moral compass, vis-a-vis a spiritual conscience that is aligned with the set apart spirit of Elohim. Along these lines, your moral compass is the only device that leads you in the direction of true north. That is the only path that will provide you with the seal of Elohim and, in the end, everlasting life. And if you don't think this is important, let me tell you something. Even with a moral compass, navigating through life with all the spiritual aggression and opposition we are forced to face is yet one of the greatest challenges of all time. My dear friends, you must believe me. Attempting to succeed this epic challenge without a moral compass to keep you in the way of holiness is a fool's errand. A fool. Not only this, but I would have you consider how honesty is the first degree of holiness we encounter after we unlock the power of transformation. To wit, it is the first line we must master after we gain the ability to ascend the pinnacle of holiness. Now, here is the question. What is the first feature we unlock as soon as we can begin making forward progress in our quest? The answer is as obvious as it is sure, vis-a-vis a moral compass, the primary illustration of honesty and the source of the conscience Yahuwah has placed within your heart. Why? It's because you need the Spirit to order your steps for the full duration of your quest, from the first step unto the last. And this is why the first feature you unlock before taking that first step is a moral compass, for without it, you'll get nowhere fast. Heretofore, I recommend, don't be a fool. You need the guidance of the Ruach to survive in these last days. And so I'll say it again. If you operate outside of the spirit of honesty with no conscience and no compass, you will eventually become so lost that you will be even harder to find than an honest man. Now, here is today's assignment. Meditate on all the lessons you have heard this week and ask the Father to give you clarity on anything you are struggling to receive. And if you are led, please feel free to reach out to me. You can fill out a form on our website and let us know what questions you have. And remember, the only question that can truly hurt you is the one you fail to ask. Last but not least, enjoy the upcoming Shabbat and the weekend, and be ready to get back at it next week as we continue to make our calling and election sure in pursuit of the precious and priceless seal of Elohim. Now, here is what's next. We completed today's podcast, End Times 442, Reigning Over Contempt, Part 2. And the next podcast is entitled End Times 443, Reigning Over Contempt, Part 3. I will post this podcast on Monday, March 31st, 2025. Until then, my friends, Continue to be led by the Spirit of Elohim. Continue to watch. Continue to pray. Continue in fasting. And most of all, continue to be focused, for the end is coming. The end is near.